Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Samira Tilley, Marketing Manager at Assemble Systems. Our webinar today will cover how BNBuilders is using Assemble and BIM to supercharge their pre-construction process. Now let's get started. It is my pleasure to introduce you to Tim Kelly, Senior Product Manager at Assemble. Go ahead, Tim.
Thank you so much, Samira. As always, we're going to start with a brief agenda. So today we're going to go through and introduce our speakers. And then from there, we'll talk a bit about both Assemble and BNBuilders. And then Chris today is going to dive into a handful of use cases, some of which get a bit into the weeds about the projects. And we're going to go through some specific details that may be applicable to exactly what you guys are facing today. And keep that in mind as we dive from there into the Q&A session, and feel free at any point during any of that discussion to add your questions to the question panel, and we'll address them at the end of the webinar. So with that said, as Samira mentioned, I'm Tim Kelly, Senior Product Manager at Assemble. I'm a part of Autodesk now. And my background is in construction management. I come from the industry and a user of Assemble as a product and a user of other Autodesk products, as many of you guys I'm sure are. And within Assemble, my role here is to talk about where we head as a solution and what we're doing to address the issues that you guys face in the industry today. So I'll leave it at that, and I'm going to go ahead and introduce both Don Hendrick and Chris Everist. Don, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, good afternoon. Don Hendrick here from the Boston area, and I'm thrilled to be with you today. My background is in engineering software, and for the last 15 years has been focused on solutions for the construction industry. So I'm looking forward to today's session.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Chris Everist. I have a background in architecture of about 13 plus years. I've been working within a general contractor environment for the past 10 years plus or minus, using BIM, really defining opportunities to use models the best way possible in the construction environment. I have a passion for connecting people and ideas, and thrilled to share with you some workflows that I'm constantly improving. So hopefully with some feedback, we can take them up a notch, and thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Chris. And certainly you guys will see today, as Chris mentioned, he has a passion for connecting people and systems. So we'll get into that in a minute. And Don was very brief, but I'll say in regards of BIM and the construction space, Don, I believe has reached Godfather status, or that sort of level. So I know he doesn't like to toot his own horn about that kind of thing, but I would say certainly great to have both of you guys on today. So to start and give a little bit of an introduction of Assemble, we like to classify ourselves as a system of engagement. And we kind of organize that in a few different thoughts. One, we want users to engage with the data to make it what they need and have fit for their particular use case. Two, we like users to engage with one another. And as you're organizing and combining data from different workflows with your model content, with your point clouds and your drawings, you're enabled this particular workflow around that data where you're sharing information. Chris is going to talk a lot about that today. But in general, too, we like to also bring in that engagement with other systems. We know that there are a number of different legacy systems in the industry and have a lot of power and usefulness and are best of class. And we also want to engage with those other systems so that it's easy to bring in that information. So with that said, we organize those thoughts around that conditioning, the information brought in and pushed out of our system, the organization you do, the use of quantities and other model data for those workflows and again, connecting both people and systems. Don is going to dive in a bit deeper on those key concepts and where we're looking forward to in the future with Autodesk.
Thanks, Tim. Again, it's a pleasure to be here to learn more about how BNBuilders sees the world. What I want to share is an insight into why it's so valuable to customers and prospects that we are part of Autodesk. It's also why we started partnering with them in the first place. While the last slide Tim showed had condition, organize, connect, you'll notice this slide is slightly different, but I think consistent. First, assemble. Assemble here is another word for federate or join together. Assemble projects can contain multiple models from multiple sources to be viewed and counted on, all as one project. It can also pull drawings and metadata from design systems and other sources to create a more complete data model of the project. Then we condition it. So condition defined as making ready for use in the dictionary. Here what it means for you is that we can create packages or views or schedules and information that are ready for use by different people in the construction project, such as subs, engineers, superintendents, schedulers. And often they're only interested in a certain part of the project being shown in a certain format. And that is really Assemble's superpower. Makes it easy to send them what they need or whatever they create, or they can create or refine what they need. Finally, the use cases or the workflows. You can use Assemble project data in many ways, connected to other systems. The two I like to shout out to would be Sage and P6, or in report form like a takeoff or a checklist. Customers being successful, like BNBuilders, have always been a focus of our business model. Today, our customer success team, and we have a proof of value documentation process that works hard to drive ROI and higher project profits for your team, basically making things easier. And then finally, people ask, well, why Autodesk and Assemble? My answer is, in the AEC world, Autodesk is a platform. It's a huge platform. Much of the design data people work with come from Autodesk applications. And over the last few years, they focused their company on the cloud, as we are. That's good for customers, good for the industry, and good for you. So thank you for this opportunity to chat with you, and I'm handing it now off to Chris to take a look at the world from a BNBuilders perspective.
Thanks, Don. So just a few notes about BNBuilders. Founded in 2000, so almost 20 years old. As you can read, 175 plus employees, 3 office locations, soon expanding to 4. We're predominantly a West Coast contractor. I'm just speaking from personal experience joining BNB. It's the culture is entrepreneurial, innovative, and just a pleasure to work in. This is a kind of highlight of where we think BNBuilders really shines and is different from our competition. We have really an integrated pre-construction approach. I'll define quote-unquote integration in a moment. We self-perform both concrete and metal framing and drywall and oftentimes casework. We have an advanced virtual design and construction group, a tight-knit group. We have an internal laser scanning and surveying, really intended to support our self-perform groups. It's a small company. We're tight-knit, and we're really continuously iterating and improving our processes. And I'm just glad to be able to share some examples of those with you. Great. So just to quote a former colleague of mine, I stand on the shoulders of giants. Where most of us are familiar with the plan, do, study, adjust cycle. I am always, this is on my coat sleeve, so to say, in terms of how I approach doing new things. And it's really my rock and my anchor. to really guide me around how to do the very best of everything I'm doing, and to remind myself that there's always a way to do it better. So this is an evangelist when it comes to process improvement, and this is where it starts.
I'll jump in here and say I like to talk about this a lot as well. From my background and perspective, I end up always saying you know, in that planning stage, you're adding information. You have information that creates options, which then ultimately drive decisions, and then that cycle continues. Those decisions create more information, and again, the focus here is on what is that information you're working with, you're studying, etc. So.
This is a quote. I can probably attribute it to 2, maybe 3 different people, but it's sort of spun out of the current, really, innovation, call it craze or focus. Sometimes innovation can be a little cloudy, but I'm reminded that problems are truly opportunities, and it's important to understand the root cause of the problems and take the time to study them. And completely acknowledge that a problem is truly a space for a solution to fall into. And that is our goal. Our approach with our innovation group here at BNBuilders is really taking the time to just remind yourself who is the customer, what problem are they facing doing their job, and how can we make it just a little easier. This is a problem-solving approach that I have used for years. It's called an A3, really just because of the paper size. And it is a framework to define a problem and propose a solution. And this is really created to focus a goal of having our estimators really use models more. One of our company directors told me he wants to see estimators with models on their screens. And Assemble really fits into that scenario, but traction sometimes is difficult to build when we're faced with change. So we owed it to ourselves to study why. So one of the main problems, you can see that there's a couple problems, but the problem I wanted to focus on today is that oftentimes when we get a model-based quantities, it's a mass dump or export from one platform or the other, and the quantities just aren't organized in a way that is really useful to an estimator, and they don't have time for that. What are we going to do? I think Assemble really offers a elegant solution to being able to touch the model, organize the model, and be able to sort it in a way that's meaningful to the end user.
Jumping in here, I think what you're describing here, I correlate in my mind back to a 2D takeoff process. What you're doing when you dive between a floor plan, possibly an elevation, some details or section views, you're conditioning that data. You're creating takeoff conditions when you do that, and you need to bounce around in a lot of different places of the document set to organize it in your own mind. And so this is a correlation to that is that model comes in. It's design data. It's a lot of information that you've got to kind of sift through to get exactly out what you want.
And Tim, you really hit problem one, which is that there's something about turning the pages in a set and tracing 2D drawings where you're learning about the project, and that step is so crucial to starting, getting familiar with the project and understanding, what is the model-based step for doing something just like that. And no, that's thanks for bringing it up.
Sure.
Yeah.
And the other thing on this is it feels like, and to better describe an A3, you mentioned just kind of what you guys are using it for and doing, but basically what you're doing here is leaning out your problem-solving process, right? You're actually diving in, documenting that, and slimming down exactly what those workflows need to be.
Yes, and I think that the primary intent of the A3 process is to begin to share ownership over the change. All too often, you have a go-getter of a change agent who wants to, move mountains, and hats off to them, but we can't do it ourselves. And the A3 is a tool that pulls everybody together, no pun intended, actually pun intended, really allows us to share ownership over the change, truly, simply. So this is what a traditional, and I say traditional, it's sans or without assemble, model-based quantity takeoff process looks like. We have an architect that produces a design model. We receive it. Now this is a swim lane diagram, so each of the rows are, say, different roles. When we receive the model, we being the general contractor, we go through a process of renaming maybe Revit family types, maybe assigning uniformat codes, just to begin to classify, and we're using Assemble's words, condition the model so we can sort the data in a way that's meaningful to us. And then there's a model adjustment step. Maybe the geometry isn't broken up and the locations that really make sense. And so the goal here is to reduce some of that rework. And this is the really safe, I think of it as a bank vault in a way of that really protects the value that I and my team have invested in the process. A lot of that conditioning is safe now. I can take the conditioning that I've done in Assemble and sync it back to new versions of the model. And that's truly priceless. And I recognize that immediately when seeing Assemble for the first time, and it was a no-brainer to invest in the platform because it did offer me that truly that value. So I didn't have to flush all the work away.
I'll say too, personally, I've been in the place where I've been adding Revit parameters to a model, and then immediately as I'm going through that process, I receive an update to that model, and I need to go back and unwind the things that I've done and wind them up in the new model, the new version. And you don't own that. You don't own the file. You don't own the space where you're adding that information. And what I'm hearing you say is that you have a space that you own where all of that conditioning lives, and it can work bidirectionally with the file or the assets that you're receiving, as well as the downstream things that you're doing with it, and ultimately reducing that rework, as you mentioned.
Yeah, it is truly a hub of for the workflow, and this diagram kind of shows that. It's in the middle.
Yeah, absolutely.
So first project I'd like to discuss is with a confidential client. You can look at some of the metrics. Pretty significant win for BNBuilders, and it presented some challenges in terms of using data from the model. It really forced me to challenge some of the workflows that I've gotten comfortable and reliant on, and that's why I love working in construction. Is no 2 days are the same, and you're solving different problems all the time. So I wouldn't have it any other way. Just to keep in mind the previous process diagram, enter Rhino. So no more Revit. Now we have Rhino. So now I'm exporting an IFC from Rhino and pulling that IFC into Revit, and really broken that connection to Assemble. So I'm back at kind of square one in terms of the need to rework data. But we did get the model, Rhino model, into Assemble after jumping through a couple of different programs, relatively painless. And this is what the data looked like. So real similar to that little tough math export of data from yesterday, or yestertime, as my 3-year-old likes to say.
Yeah, actually, real quick before we jump on this slide, I do want to say that he did not receive the geometry looking like this. This is blurred for confidentiality purposes, but it was not that it came in as a finger painting into the system.
Exactly. Yeah. Thanks, Tim. So the steps to begin to classify or condition the model is to take advantage of some of Assemble's new features, which is adding your own Assemble properties. The assemble properties are a great way to sort of lock up all the value you're adding to the model. So you can see I added uniform at level 1, 2, and 3. And then I set up a view that I called hide assigned to hide any content that I've assigned at, in this case, uniform at level 2 to. So in the next slide, you'll see a video playing through what it's like working in that view, and this is to allow give me some confidence that I've assigned everything a code.
And before we jump ahead to that video, I do want to just quickly mention and give a shout out to the Assemble development team. We've done a lot of work recently on enhancing how Assemble properties work and what you have available. And we just recently released the ability to add quantities or numeric properties rather than just text properties. We also gave the ability to do grouping so that this list of properties can be organized into groups just like your model-based properties can. And in the near future, we're currently working on the ability to define data hierarchy. So like an assembly code where you have those uniform at values, they can roll up to A, A10, A1010. And then we'll also be giving a flat list of predefined values where you have, maybe 10 values that you want as a specific set of information. So all of that is happening around what you're going to be conditioning.
And all of those features would have been extremely valuable in this workflow. But
sure.
So what you'll see me doing is clicking geometry, assigning it a code, and then it disappears. So the goal is to have an empty workspace, or otherwise have everything assigned to code. Pretty simple workflow, but if we have any architects on the phone, it's a lot like highlighting red lines. It's a smart process.
I'll say that process too is ultimately flexible. Where I know some people particularly like to color code instead of hide. Yeah, I just say that process is flexible to fit a lot of different cases where you want to visually change how you're organizing that conditioning.
Yeah, and there's still waste in the process. It's certainly available for improvement. And as Tim alluded to earlier, really what we're reaching for is really more integration with the entire team. Really priming ourselves and preparing for the opportunity to pull each of the stakeholders into the fold, into the process, and maybe get the architect to implement some of this data structure. I being spending a lot of my time sitting in the seat of an architect or being an architect, I understand that they have their own problems to solve and probably don't want to think about what's important to sometimes the project and a bigger perspective, and that's okay. But it sure would be great if we can all look at things from the big picture, and we will constantly be striving for that.
Yeah. I feel like I sound like I'm in a Southern Baptist church right now, just constantly saying amen to the things that you say. But I think that's key. I think that communication and partnership on a project is absolutely what we need to strive to do, and how that information is flowing between one another across the entire project team is what ultimately drives a successful project.
So this is a tool that's available for Rhino, and this is a way to add some intelligence to the Icy Export, something that we're looking to right now, and maybe it's a tool that we'll introduce to the architects so that they can start, exporting some, IFCs with some rich data. So again, there's always opportunities for improvement, and I'm always primed to recognize them. So,
as much as we talked about conditioning and in the sense of bringing the information that you have into the classifications you need, I would say this tool and this process you're talking about is like a pre-export conditioning where you need that specific information to drive decision making. So.
Exactly, because the export to the IFC really strips all the data out.
then Chris, any last comments? So we're going to be diving into your second workflow and move through that pretty quickly here. But any last comments on this initial workflow in this project?
Only to be nimble, be ready to. I don't want to overuse the word, but pivot and change directions, and just be open-minded to the process and the way people want to work. And I think Assemble really is a great tool that supports that flexibility.
Absolutely. Fantastic. And let's go ahead and dive in then into case study number 2.
Great. So this is a project that the BNB team in San Diego is proud to have completed, certainly up for architectural awards. It is the new home for Vertex Pharmaceuticals in San Diego. I know that Vertex has their headquarters is in Boston. You may see their building on the skyline, and they developed a drug for cystic fibrosis. So they are developing cures for disease in this facility. It was one of the tenants. Let's see. So it was a corn shell and TI kind of 2 contracts project. You can see the architects on the top and the real estate developer here on the bottom. Cool project, lots of different team members. One of the challenges is that the owner wanted to receive a model to operate their facility. For me, this is the first time I've ever had an owner ask for this. After 7-8 years in the industry, I knew it was an idea, but getting the chance to actually do it was an experience, and certainly presented many challenges along the way. And I'll talk through only one of them right now. That could just honestly be a separate webinar in and of itself. But what we're looking at is what the final output looks like. This is a separate platform, really a facility management tool that can integrate with the building management system and the operations and maintenance system. And you can see a bunch of the data on the right. And important to note is that content is referred to as assets in the facility management world. And the things that are important to know about these assets are referred to as attributes. And these assets are organized by omniclass. So a third classification system in it joining uniformat and master format. So it's some rethinking in terms of organization and sort of classification that had to take place. So
it sounds like you need some sort of container for all of these different things to live in, something like a model or something like that, right?
Yeah, yeah. And this is one container, and this is the project that I initially insisted that Assemble be invested to support, because I knew that data was coming from every which way, and I was thinking, how am I going to be able to manage all that inflow of data and make sure that the data is going to the right version? And this is before collaboration for Revit, before I knew about it.
Sure.
So I was thinking, well, I need something, and Assemble sort of landed on my lap at the right time, and the first tool I used to really get comfortable with what I was going to have to accomplish. And these are some initial swim lane diagrams that I used to map out some steps. Certainly, there's a planning step where we're defining scope. There's the modeling step, and how different modeling platforms are getting exported and translated to feed into this platform. And then finally, a step that would be simple enough, which is assigning data to the assets. Hey, I've got Assemble. I got this under control. I'd like to talk a little bit about how we use Assemble to get that step under control. So the challenge here is, like I said before, I'm the guy with the glasses in the middle, and receiving models and making sure that the models and the data are lining up to where they need to go, that the data is correct as it lines up to this big fat blue circle here in the middle, defining, what assets are valuable, what attributes are valuable, and are we filling them out? And is it getting to the right version? Is it getting to the right, content? It's kind of a daunting task.
To add to that, is it in a format that's useful for the facilities manager at the end of the job? So
Yeah.
I think that's
Yeah.
also a big hurdle to make sure that what you're doing is transferable.
Absolutely, and that format was Revit, and it kind of blows a lot of people's minds because we know that Revit isn't always used for fabrication modeling, and I think it's gotten a lot better in recent years. But when we started this project, AutoCAD was used, and there was a fair amount of remodeling that had to take place, and budgets that were blown as a result. And it's painful, especially when you have to deliver that news and balance keeping promises against unknowns due to technology not being at a fully compatible point. So it's a tough line to balance. And again, I think Assemble really was a really flexible tool that kind of helped me put some ointment and Band-Aid on some wounds along the way. I don't want to dramatize it. You can tell I really care about our clients and delivering promises, and Assemble was kind of a beacon in a foggy day sometimes. So I'll show you, kind of walk through the steps.
Sure, and that's good to know, and valuable information. As you mentioned, there are workflows that you have today that still require some rework, and there are certainly avenues that Assemble's looking to address different pieces of that.
Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts, and a lot of them.
Right.
As one improves, it demands improvement from the other one. It's just a life puzzle, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, back to the same comment you said earlier, as contractors, we are ultimately day in, day out problem solvers.
So let's take a look at this step that I'm pointing to and circling. Right. So this is another diagram. We see the three roles. Say our general contractor here at the bottom. That's myself. One trade partner, mechanical and plumbing, and then electrical. So our electrical trade, as you can see, was after I defined a scope of attributes, and after sitting down with them and reviewing them, they're perfectly fine entering data right into Revit in close contact with the people doing that. And that Revit model I could upload pretty seamlessly to this common data environment. The mechanical and plumbing trade, on the other hand, preferred a different process, namely because a Revit technician, quote, was more expensive than more of a data entry resource or person. So what I had to do, or rather what I got to do, was I created several views in Assemble. I'll show you them in a moment, that were defined according to filtering out the different omni-class classifications that I set up in Revit. I exported a Excel spreadsheet, handed it over to, numerous Excel spreadsheets, if not tens, maybe a little less than 100. They filled them out. I received them, imported those spreadsheets into Assemble, and then from Assemble synchronized the Revit model. And it was initially just, hey, let's try this, and it worked on the first try. I was thrilled. So it was reliable. Yeah, you can see some of the hopscotching around here in the bottom. Certainly not ideal.
I think it's certainly not ideal, but I think it fits anyone's day-to-day process. I can't imagine how, I will tell you, I don't think anyone in the construction industry functions without Excel. So if there are people out there, I don't know them, and you can certainly raise your hand here, but I think it's a critical piece of a lot of different problem-solving steps, because it's really flexible, and that's we're certainly not a Excel tool at at Assemble, but we have the flexibility to allow you to do that, move data in and out to different formats, and that's key for us.
Yeah, and there are other tools that do the same thing that Assemble supported here, but Assemble for me was just again a safe place to know that I know where the latest models are. Other people can access them. Other people can manipulate the data, really freeing me up to not be the bottleneck if possible. So this is just a quick snapshot of maybe a tenth of the Assemble views I set up that I was exporting spreadsheets from. And this is what one of the spreadsheets looked like, and this is an idea of the kind of data we were collecting. Fan quantity, supply fan motor horsepower, supply fan capacity, and we're talking, 15, 20 different attributes for, I think it was like 60 asset types, right? Also a ton of data. Again, constantly asking, well, what can we do to make this better? And I think the obvious answer that I kind of suggested to you before was, well, what if some of these assemble steps could have been done by our mechanical and plumbing trade? And what if I could take that assemble logo here under a general contractor and copy one up to the middle row? Let's get more people on the platform, being able to simply get a picture next to the this row in Excel that they're filling out information about. I think they would have benefited from that, and there's always room for improvement.
In that process that you're talking about is certainly something we're interested in, and making it easy to invite and utilize your the investment you've made in Assemble across the team more broadly. So it's good to see that that's where you're wanting to go, and that's where we desire to go. But Chris, these two different workflows, again, I think they're invaluable for us to know and to share, that it's focused on collaborating across the entire project team to try and solve a problem and ultimately give better content, better turnover information to the owner at the end of the project. And from Assemble and our whole team, we really do appreciate you taking time to share this today.
I love technology, and really eager to see how Assemble is joining forces with Autodesk, and how both can really benefit from each other, and eager to see how these really behemoths, and at least Autodesk, and information authorship and hosting can really benefit from all the great things that Assemble is doing.
As Chris said, he loves technology. I guess my point that I would like to make with the folks listening in is you only need, one or two people like Chris, and then you can leverage this solution throughout literally hundreds of people in your organization. And there's, huge opportunity to improve the customer delivery process, which is what we're all interested in. And the productivity of the industry itself. So I'm excited to be here. Loved watching Chris talk about it and give good examples. And there's just no end in sight to what we're all going to do together.